Content warning. This series discusses the sexual assault and the murder of a child. This episode includes references to forensic examination and post-mortem findings described in clinical, non-graphic language. Listener discretion is advised. If you or someone you know needs support, contact Lifeline on 131114 or 1-800-RESPECT on 1-800-737-732 or your local crisis service. On the evening of Monday, 20 March 1978, 13-year-old Denise McGregor disappeared within a short distance of her home in Pascoe Vale. By the following day, her body had been found more than 40 kilometres north on Merriang Road in Wallen East. Those 2 points, disappearance and discovery, have never changed. They are fixed. Everything that can be said must fit between them. Across this series, the ground beneath those points has been mapped. What is known about Denise's movements, what investigators documented at the time, and what evidence from 1978 still exists in a form that can be relied upon. What remains now is the framework. Here, the task is to test scenarios, not for certainty and not for comfort, but for feasibility. Some require fewer assumptions. Some sit within the constraints that remain. Others only hold if possibilities are stacked on top of one another. That is why each scenario must be examined alongside the others, because when one account settles too early, alternatives stop being tested, and details that don't fit are quietly passed over. What follows is an examination of strain. Each explanation is measured against what the evidence allows and against what it resists. So the question now is this: when every explanation is tested against what is known about the night Denise McGregor disappeared, which ones can still bear the weight, and which begin to fall away? Part 4, Denise McGregor. 30 unaccounted for minutes. To do that, the work has to be precise. Each explanation is taken apart into its basic components: contact, movement, time, and environment. No single account is treated as default. None is dismissed out of hand. Instead, each is placed under the same pressure. What does it require to be true? What assumptions does it rely on? And where does it begin to strain when measured against what is known? This approach does not ask which explanation feels most convincing. It asks which ones remain viable once convenience and hindsight are removed. Because in long-running cases, error does not usually enter through invention. It enters when one explanation is allowed to settle too early and everything else is measured against it rather than alongside it. Here, that order is reversed, and the testing begins with the most unforgiving constraint of all: time. Time and continuity are unforgiving because they compress choice. They narrow where contact can occur. They narrow how long control can be maintained without detection. And they narrow how far a person can be moved before ordinary concern becomes active searching. Denise leaves home sometime between 6:10 and 6:15 p.m. on Monday evening. That range comes from her mother Carmel's statement, made on 28 July 1978. She is walking with her sister, Sharon. They are sent to the shop on Bell Street, the street they lived on, to collect dinner. This is not open-ended time. It is an errand. Short, familiar, and expected to end quickly. They walk to the takeaway shop. They order food. While waiting, they go next door to a milk bar. Denise buys a Big M and drinks it. They return, collect the food, and begin walking home. Up to this point, there is no delay. No witness places them stationary for any significant time. No account introduces additional movement. So the window remains tight. The first divergence occurs at the intersection of Bell Street and Anderson Street. Denise tells her sister she is going to get the drinks, not from either of the shops they have just been to, but from another shop further along Anderson Street, approximately 120 metres up the road. Sharon continues home while Denise turns to walk north. Sharon arrives home at approximately 7:05 p.m. That time is recorded in the statements from both Carmel and Sharon McGregor. From that moment, the clock becomes fixed, because everything that follows must fit around it. Within approximately 15 minutes, Denise has not returned. Sharon is sent to look for her. She walks down Anderson Street and does not see her. She returns home, where she is sent out again, this time to the milk bar specifically. She speaks to the milk bar owner, who says Denise has not been there. Then the search begins. Both Carmel and Sharon search the streets for approximately 30 minutes. They check the railway station, phone boxes, the streets themselves, in the rain. They drive the area, searching, but they do not find her. They return home and police are contacted. To the point where Denise separates from her sister, to the point active searching begins, that time window is short, measured in minutes. Sharon began searching the local streets sometime between approximately 7:15 and 7:35 p.m. That gives Denise a window of potentially 10 to 30 minutes to disappear. This creates the first pressure point. Whatever happened to Denise must occur within that window, and it must do one of two things: remove her from the area quickly or conceal her within it. There is no third option. So the first question is, was Denise still within that local area during the search, concealed, out of sight? Or had she already been removed? Both remain possible, but they strain in different ways. Remaining nearby requires concealment rapidly achieved while a search is underway. Removal requires rapid contact, rapid control, and rapid movement within a narrow window. Time forces that choice. That window is tight, particularly in a time before mobile phones and online connectivity. If Denise remained local, concealment had to occur rapidly, within minutes, in a residential environment. If she was removed by vehicle, contact, compliance, and departure all had to occur before that search window tightened. Importantly, Denise is seen after she separates from her sister. This anchors her movements. However, not all accounts can be true at the same time. A witness places Denise at the intersection of Bell and Anderson Street just before 7 p.m, carrying food with her sister. The girls part, with Denise walking north. That account fits. It aligns with Sharon's statement and it aligns with the timeline. There is no conflict. Further along Anderson Street, another witness places a girl consistent with Denise within that same window at approximately 7:05 p.m. She walks on the roadway. She looks left, She looks right. She looks behind her. She looks across at the witness, with the witness later describing her as appearing concerned. She then turns back towards Bell Street and is not seen again. That account also fits, as it aligns with the timeline, aligns with Denise having separated from her sister and with her not yet having reached the shop. Now place the third account against those anchors. The shopkeeper later stated Denise entered his shop, made purchases, and that several young men were present, placing this at approximately 6:30 p.m. The timeline described by Carmel and Sharon McGregor does not accommodate a 6:30 p.m. visit. At that time, Denise is still on the initial errand with her sister. There is a second issue. During initial checks, the shopkeeper stated Denise had not been in the shop. That account later changed after the case received media coverage, a context that can affect recall and retrospective pattern matching. A changed statement does not make an account false, but where it conflicts with the timeline and contemporaneous checks, it cannot be used as an anchor point for Denise's movements. So this account cannot be used here to place Denise inside that shop. That tightens the sequence further. Denise is last reliably placed outside, walking alone, at approximately 7:05 p.m. The next axis to consider is how contact began. Here, we look at a prearranged versus opportunistic contact. If Denise is not in the shop and she is not at home, and she is not seen again after the intersection, then contact must occur somewhere along that path between Bell Street and Westgate Street, within minutes. There is a list of evidence that constrains this axis. Denise was last observed near the Anderson Street area at approximately 7:05 p.m. No witness observed a struggle, raised voices, or a forced abduction. One witness, Rhonda, described Denise scanning the area, staring and having a look of concern, but explicitly stated that Denise did not give the impression she was waiting for somebody. That statement was taken on 1 May 1978, approximately 6 weeks after the event, from a 15-year-old girl who had since learned that the person she saw was murdered. There are two primary possibilities: opportunistic contact and prearranged contact. Opportunistic contact requires Denise to be alone. A person approaches, control is established, movement begins, all without drawing attention. If we place that against the evidence, there is no reported disturbance, no reported struggle, no witness describing an interaction, and no vehicle observed stopping. It does not eliminate opportunistic contact, but it does increase the number of things that must go unseen. However, prearranged contact requires something different. A reason for Denise to continue moving, a point of moving, and an expectation of contact. Now place that against the evidence. Denise does not buy the coke at the first shop. She does not buy the coke at the second shop. She continues moving and separates from her sister. There is also the alibi request, where Denise has asked a friend to provide an alibi for her on the night she was abducted, raped, and murdered. That occurred before she had failed to return home. It does not prove a meeting, but it does introduce expectation. And it creates asymmetric pressure. A prearranged or anticipated contact tolerates a preemptive alibi request more easily. A purely opportunistic encounter, arising without warning, without anticipation, without any reason to expect scrutiny, has to work harder to accommodate it. It does not rule it out, but it requires additional assumptions to hold. Denise's errand also narrows her movement options. She was meant to buy food and drinks. The drinks she was meant to purchase were available at 2 shops on Bell Street, the hamburger shop and the milk bar next to it. Denise then indicated she was going to a 3rd shop to purchase Coke, despite it being available at the 2 she had already visited. That detail is not proof of a prearranged meeting. But it matters because it introduces a decision to continue moving. The deviation creates a stretch of time in which Denise is alone and unaccounted for, between confirmed sighting and absence. It creates a reason for Denise to be briefly alone. It opens a short stretch of street where contact could occur, and it expands the timeline by minutes that can affect which witness accounts can be reconciled. In Denise's case, minutes matter. The absence of a visible struggle is consistent with voluntary proximity at the moment contact occurred, whether that contact was expected or unexpected. However, Rhonda's impression does not present Denise as overtly waiting for a prearranged pickup. If a meeting had been planned, it did not manifest as obvious waiting behaviour to this observer. This does not eliminate prearranged contact, but it constrains how it must be framed. Any prearranged meeting must have been informal, fluid, or minimally visible. It may have involved a loose expectation, somewhere around here, rather than a fixed rendezvous point. Alternatively, contact may have occurred after Denise began to leave the area. What this axis rules out is a highly structured, overt pickup scenario. Someone parked, waiting, and clearly expected. And Rhonda's observation needs one further qualification. The behaviour observed is consistent with attention directed to the surrounding environment, but it does not establish why. The next category is the degree of familiarity. How well did Denise know the person she left with? Familiarity is not binary. It exists on a spectrum. We can see, based off the evidence, there are some extremes already under strain. A complete stranger carries significant strain given the absence of a reported struggle or disturbance at the point of departure. A close acquaintance, family-level familiarity, also carries significant strain given no identification despite investigation and the secrecy suggested by the alibi request. So that leaves us with the viable range. The evidence supports limited familiarity, most plausibly prior contact without deep personal knowledge, and a relationship mediated through communication rather than shared social circles. CB radio contact fits this profile. It allows repeated interaction without identity verification. It permits trust without traceability. It explains why no peer, family member, or adult could identify the individual later. However, the investigation summary provided to the coronial inquest in 1978 uses the word met in reference to Frank or Lightning One. That language allows 2 interpretations. Contact via CB radio only, met in the sense of made acquaintance, or one or more brief in-person meetings prior to March 20. The evidence does not permit us to choose definitively between those 2. Both remain viable. This does not identify a person or establish contact on the night. It simply establishes that contact outside Denise's immediate social environment was possible. What is not supported is a long-standing, visible, or socially embedded relationship. Axis 3 is expectation versus surprise at the point of contact. Rhonda's observation is critical here. She describes scanning behaviour, repeated looking around, a look of concern, and a moment where Denise turns back towards Bell Street. But she also states Denise did not appear to be waiting. This produces a narrow window of interpretation. Denise may have been anticipating contact, but uncertain whether or where it would occur. Alternatively, she may have been processing a situation that had just changed, such as recognising someone she had not expected to encounter at that moment. Importantly, concern does not equate to fear, and it does not establish whether Denise was responding to the person she would later leave with or to the situation itself. This axis therefore limits certainty rather than resolving it. Axis 4 covers secrecy and disclosure, what Denise told and did not tell others. Sharon McGregor stated that Denise did not tell her she was meeting a boy that night. That statement is significant, but it must be weighed correctly. Denise had a demonstrated pattern of concealment from family. Sharon was 11 years old, and statements were taken months later after intense police questioning and family distress. This evidence does not negate pre-arrangement, but it prevents us from asserting that Denise openly conceptualised the evening as meeting a boy in a way that would have been disclosed to her sister. If anything, it supports the conclusion that whatever Denise was planning, she was deliberately compartmentalising it. This is also particularly relevant in 1978. Children ran errands alone. Adults spoke to children without raising concern. A child entering a vehicle did not automatically trigger intervention. That social context reduces strain on explanations involving brief compliance, whether with someone Denise recognised or with someone who appeared credible enough not to trigger immediate fear. It increases strain on explanations requiring immediate visible force in a populated setting. Recognition does not require a family member. It does not require a close relationship, and it does not require long-term familiarity. Recognition can be minimal, a friend of a friend, a neighbour's older child, someone previously encountered in passing, someone known only by context rather than name. The evidence does not allow us to narrow that further. The investigation summary records that Denise did not have a CB radio at home. Her mother specifically stated this. It was later established that Denise used a CB radio at a girlfriend's house, though that friend's identity was not determined in the months following the investigation. The record also notes that Denise had met a youth known by the call sign Lightning One. Despite publicity, he was not identified. These details confirm that Denise had avenues of contact beyond her immediate family and street environment. They do not confirm active communication on the night she disappeared, but they establish possibility beyond neighbourhood familiarity. All of these constraints operate at the same time. Time, contact, familiarity, expectation, and disclosure are not separate questions. Any explanation must satisfy all of them simultaneously. It must fit the available time. It must account for how contact occurs without drawing attention. It must align with the degree of familiarity required for movement to occur. It must accommodate what was and was not disclosed beforehand. And it must do all of this without contradiction. When these constraints are considered together, the range of viable explanations narrows further. What remains must not only be possible in isolation, it must remain possible when everything is applied at once. After contact, control must be established because Denise was transported. Now, in order to test control, there are several options. A violent seizure, a blitz attack, compliance, and/or coercion. When people hear the word abduction, they often picture a violent seizure, a blitz attack. That is one possible mechanism, but it is also the most exposed. Noise, movement, resistance. A blitz encounter increases the risk of noise. It increases the risk of interruption, and it increases the chance that something is witnessed as immediately wrong. There is no confirmed report of any of that. The absence of recorded screaming or disturbance does not exclude a blitz attack. It may simply mean no one heard, or no one reported, or the relevant witness never connected what they heard to Denise until it was too late. All at the same time. That absence does create strain. By contrast, explanations involving brief compliance, deception, or controlled coercion tolerate uncertainty more easily. They allow movement without immediate alarm. They allow contact to look ordinary. And they align more comfortably with the social norms of 1978. That does not tell us what happened. It tells us what requires fewer additional assumptions to remain viable. That is the purpose of stress testing. Consider controlled movement, conversation, compliance, deception. It reduces exposure. It allows movement to appear ordinary. The window between the last observation at approximately 7:05 p.m. and concern being raised at home between 7:15 and 7:35 p.m. is narrow. Any scenario must account for rapid departure from the area, minimal exposure during that departure, and access to immediate transport. Explanations that require prolonged persuasion, wandering, or multiple failed approaches begin to strain against that window. Movement becomes the next pressure point. Denise was found more than 40 kilometres away. That distance does not require premeditation, but it does require access, a vehicle, time, and the ability to maintain control long enough for transport to occur. Whatever happens in Anderson Street must lead to transport without interruption. Now test concealment. If Denise remains hidden in the area, she must be hidden whilst her family searches for approximately 30 minutes. That requires a location. It requires time. It requires that the search does not intersect with it. Test removal. If Denise is removed, contact must be rapid, control must be immediate, and movement must begin quickly. All of that must occur without being recognised as unusual. That narrows what can hold. If Denise was removed quickly, the distance to Merriang Road becomes less significant. It is simply where movement ended. If Denise remained nearby for any period, then the decision to later transport her over that distance becomes more complex and carries more risk. If Denise remained within Pascoe Vale for any extended period after 7:05 p.m, concealment must account for family searching by vehicle, passing traffic, and residential visibility. Extended concealment locally introduces risk rapidly. Again, neither is ruled out, but the location forces the same discipline as time. Every additional step must be accounted for. Any explanation must accommodate transport, assault, and death without detection within the time window imposed by the search. Some explanations absorb that complexity more easily than others, not because they are proven, but because they require fewer additional assumptions to remain coherent. Travel north from Pascoe Vale to Wollin East in 1978 would likely involve Bell Street and the Hume Highway before turning onto rural roads. That journey is sustained. It is not a short deviation. Once north of the metropolitan area, turning into Mariang Road is a decision. It is not a necessary continuation of transit. The recovery location is rural and would have offered limited light and limited passing traffic. Reaching it required deliberate travel and time with minimal interruption. That does not, on its own, prove planning or familiarity, but it does reduce the plausibility of a purely random, moment-to-moment improvisation. A stop at that location is easier to reconcile with purposeful movement than with an immediate, nearby disposal close to Pascoe Vale. Taken together, the location reduces strain on explanations involving purposeful relocation and increases strain on explanations requiring an immediate, nearby endpoint. The forensic findings establish sexual assault, lethal head trauma, and asphyxial injury. The surviving material is consistent with an assault sequence occurring within the same overall period as transport and fatal violence. It does not allow a precise minute-by-minute order, and no precise order is asserted here. A brief, impulsive street attack, or a sequence interrupted almost immediately, carries significant strain against what is recorded. Explanations involving movement into isolation before escalation carry less strain here because they require fewer interruptions and fewer points of public exposure. This axis addresses how events unfolded, not why. Her body is found on the verge. Blood is present on the road. There is disturbed ground between road and verge. Footwear is displaced and tyre impressions are described. Those features are consistent with activity occurring at or near that location rather than a simple placement after death. The scene appears to be part of the sequence, not merely an endpoint. The post-mortem findings describe fatal violence including severe head injury and neck compression. Either can be fatal. Taken together, they indicate sustained violence. If we test the sequence, we can see this. If fatal injury occurs earlier, control must be maintained during transport, over distance, without interruption. If fatal injury occurs at the scene, control must be maintained until arrival and then escalate. Both are possible, but both must carry the same discipline. The sequence cannot break. The biological evidence must also be considered. Biological findings recorded in the forensic material establish sexual assault and indicate at least one male offender. The record does not establish offender number, precise timing, or location of the assault, but the assault must be accounted for within the same overall chain of events. Insect activity and stomach contents provide broad constraint bands, not timestamps. They are consistent with death occurring within hours of disappearance and exposure in an outdoor environment prior to discovery. They place strain on explanations requiring prolonged captivity or death occurring long after disappearance. Any scenario requiring extended survival past the night of March 20 strains this axis. Her stomach contains partially digested food, consistent with potato with an odour of cheese. Denise did not eat the takeaway food she had ordered, as it was handed to Sharon to take home. So the food comes from earlier or somewhere else. This does not establish a second location, but it prevents us from assuming the takeaway meal was the last food consumed. Any viable explanation must therefore accommodate sustained control, transport, sexual assault, and fatal violence without interruption. Denise's wrists were bound with her own shoelace. The binding is tight, but there are no ligature marks recorded. The post-mortem does not describe injuries consistent with sustained restraint while circulation was present. That makes prolonged binding earlier in the sequence harder to support and more consistent with a brief or later application. It therefore becomes harder to place within the initial contact phase. This establishes offender access to the victim's clothing, control occurring after footwear removal, and at least one phase of deliberate action after incapacitation. This behaviour is functional, not theatrical. It supports containment and control, not symbolic staging. Now all of this must sit together. A short errand, a deviation, a narrow time window, a last sighting, no disturbance, no confirmed contact, transport over distance, sexual assault, fatal injury, an active roadside scene. Any explanation must carry all of it. Some can, some require additional assumptions, some fail. Any explanation that depends on multiple things going unseen, unheard, or unrecorded does not become impossible, but it begins to accumulate strain. And here is what strain looks like when it accumulates. An opportunistic seizure in the street without prior contact requires that a 13-year-old girl is approached, controlled, and removed in a residential area within minutes, in low light but not darkness, without attracting attention, without resistance being reported, and without any witness describing the interaction. That does not make it impossible, but it increases the number of things that must go unseen. And as those conditions accumulate, the explanation begins to strain. The alternative, that contact was expected, requires fewer assumptions. It accounts for the separation at the intersection. It accounts for the decision not to purchase the drinks at the first shop. It accounts for continued movement away from home. And it aligns with the reported request for an alibi. But it does not resolve everything, because expectation does not equal control. Even with anticipated contact, control must still be established. Movement must still occur, and that movement must still happen without interruption. So the explanation that remains is not a complete account. It is simply one that requires fewer additional steps to function. Now place that against what follows. Denise is transported more than 40 kilometres. That requires a vehicle. It requires time. And it requires that control is maintained throughout that journey. There is no evidence of interruption, no evidence of escape, no evidence of intervention. Those requirements remain regardless of how contact begins. At Wallen East, the scene characteristics described are consistent with activity occurring at or near that location, rather than a simple placement after death. Blood on the road surface, disturbed ground between road and verge, tyre impressions, and displaced footwear suggest the roadside was part of the sequence, not merely the endpoint. The injuries recorded at post-mortem are severe. A fractured skull, cerebral injury, compression of the neck. Either could be fatal. Together they indicate sustained violence. Now return to the binding. The wrists are tied, the ligature is tight, but there are no corresponding injuries recorded. That sits poorly with prolonged restraint during struggle or with sustained circulation while bound, as described in other cases. On this record, it is harder to place the binding at the beginning of the sequence and more consistent with a brief or later application. That shifts its position. It removes it from the point of contact and places it closer to the end of the sequence. Now consider what is not present. No confirmed witness to the abduction. No confirmed point of entry into a vehicle. No confirmed interaction. And yet the outcome is fixed. Which means that whatever occurred within ordinary surroundings without being recognised as extraordinary at the time. So the field reduces, not to a single explanation, but to a smaller number of explanations that can still carry the full weight of what is known. Each of those explanations must account for the time window, the separation, the absence of disturbance, the movement out of the area, the transport over distance, the events at the scene, and the physical evidence recovered. If any part of that sequence fails, the explanation fails with it. And that is where the limits of this analysis sit. Because beyond this point, the question is no longer what could have happened. It becomes which of the remaining explanations can withstand closer examination. Denise McGregor left home on an ordinary Monday night, on an ordinary errand, as an ordinary 13-year-old girl, but she never returned home. Everything that follows remains anchored to that. Almost 48 years later, what happened to her has still not been definitively answered. But what remains is not uncertainty. It is a boundary of explanations. Join us as we take the remaining explanations one at a time, not as theories, not as conclusions, but as sequences. Reduction is not resolution. Constraint does not identify responsibility. The explanations that remain do not tell us what happened to her, but they define the conditions any explanation must satisfy in order to piece together Denise's final movements in an attempt to finally achieve justice for her. Because what remains now is not certainty. It is pressure. If you have information that could assist police, please contact Victoria Police Crime Stoppers on 1800 333 000 or submit a confidential report online at www.police.vic.gov.au/Crime Stoppers. Some names and non-essential identifying details have been changed for privacy. All core events and timings are drawn from publicly available records, inquest materials, and contemporaneous reporting. Unsolved, unforgotten, unfinished.